Well, hello everyone. My name is Thomas. Today we are talking about plants. Yes, the green things that grow, the grass you mow in your yard, the trees in the forest, plants. You know, there's a couple different types of aquatic plants that we're going to be dealing with here, and most of this video is just going to be about that, aquatic plants. It's really four different types. You have your rooted plants, which is a lot of what you see behind me, things that are actually rooted into the substrate. These guys right here. You also have non-rooted plants, which are going to be things that are just kind of floating around attached to a log or something. I got a little bit of that in here. I don't know if you can see it, it's right behind me. It's this big thing right here attached to a log. You also have floating plants, which there's some more of those in there too. The last thing is you have bulb plants. I think that right there is a good example of one of those. And bulb plants are especially important. When you get some of the more beautiful plants that you're going to encounter with bulb plants, but they're also a little bit harder ones to do. A little bit harder to find also. Well, that's not what I want. Alright, so speaking of plants, we have four basic different types of plants. And we're going to go over that in here in just a second. The first type of plant you have is your rooted plants. It's like this grass right here. There's a big bundle of roots on the bottom of that. It probably has a ribosome and crown, and it's going to run shoots underground to propagate itself. The second type of plant is going to be your non-rooted plants. Now, technically, they do have roots to them. They're just not going to need to be in substrate. So you can attach these to any hardscape part of your aquarium. I usually prefer to use driftwood for the natural look of it. And this one's actually, I just used some fishing line to attach that to the driftwood, and once the driftwood sank, the plant seems to be very happy. You also have floating plants. That's a lot of this stuff up here. It doesn't need to be planted in anything and can just hang out on the surface of your aquarium. Fourth type of plants are bulb plants. Like this guy right here. That is Madagascar lace, and those are interesting. They actually start as a little bulb, and then you plant the bulb about halfway down in the soil, and then it starts to germinate, and you get your plant out of the top of the bulb. These are going to be some of the more beautiful aquarium plants you'll encounter, but they're also very difficult to get in some cases. Alright, I think it's time we talk about planting. So you see these plants right here, most people call those stem plants. They're pretty easy to plant. All you're going to do is you're going to take and push the bottom little bit of that down into the substrate about halfway through your sand layer, and they'll be happy in there. Now as for plants like your swords and your grasses and things like that, it's going to be the same deal. You're going to insert the plant approximately halfway through your sand layer. Now if you've been following our instructions, you're going to have a 2-inch cap of sand. You're going to insert your plants 1 inch into that sand. The next type of plant you'll have to contend with is your floating plants. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Insert into aquarium, let grow. No further assistance required. For your rootless, or for your non-rooted plants, those you just need to attach to something. If you put those in the sand, they might actually rot. So the best thing to do with things like Anubias or other plants that are just going to hang out is to attach them to something so they don't float away on you. The last thing is going to be your bulb plants. The only thing you want to keep in mind when planting a bulb is that you see the top little piece right there? This part of the bulb, there's actually a whole bulb underground. I'll show you one in a minute. Now you need to make sure that top part, it's called a crown, that has to be exposed to sunlight and sticking up out of the substrate. That's where the plant's going to come out of. You can see a few of those I've planted in there.
It's the visual and performing arts of Sarasota and Manatee counties. We do it with grants and scholarships. You can find out about volunteering, donating, and shopping. SarasotaWEX.com. Is the Orpheus Chamber.
You can see new root nodes forming on these plants right here. That's typically how they propagate themselves. This plant will produce lots of little roots on the underside of the leaves, and out of the tip it will produce a whole new plant. You can start to see one forming right there up on the edge. Java fern is a great example of a plant that does not need substrate. In fact, they prefer to just sit like that. And they're kind of interesting because they actually propagate by dropping little nodes right from the leaves, and then new plants spawn out of there. This is Bacopa. The Bacopa is an interesting one because it will grow as a stem plant, but once you turn it on its side, it will begin throwing new shoots horizontally towards the direction of light. And you can see roots coming out the bottom sides of the plant, leaching out of the water column. In the back of it there's some of it planted directly into the substrate. It will do fine either planted or floating. And it is a very high light plant that will grow completely out of your tank and begin to take over everything in a matter of months. This is a great example of plants' roots. You can see they've grabbed onto the gravel that the previous owner had them loaded into, and they've actually begun growing around the gravel, holding onto it like a ball. This plant does not seem to need to be planted at all to grow. It's propagating just fine without the use of the substrate. There's some more of those plants. You can see one that's already propagated off right here. I actually just pulled that off of another plant entirely. It's its own little bud now, and there's a much bigger version of it. You can see at the end of the leaf right there, it's beginning to propagate a whole new plant. And that's exactly what the little floater you just saw was.